2NURFM, a broadcast service of the University of Newcastle.
Professor Jim Joes from the Newcastle Business School, University of Newcastle. I suppose the song Reunited could have been a bit of a, possibly something good for Britain should BritX have gone the other way. But the world is still reeling, Jim, and the people in the know are saying, look, we always knew it was going to be close, but they didn't expect this outcome.
Well, yes, good morning, Todd. Reuniting is probably not on the cards for a good many years. I mean, the exit, which was not necessarily predicted by the experts, they thought it would probably narrowly favour staying in the European Union. But it's not all that unexpected given the way in which politicians in England have tended to use the European Union as a bit of a domestic, partly a domestic football, but partly also playing the European Union card for domestic advantage. And that's what's that meant is it's built up a groundswell of, shall we say, ambivalent to hostile views of the European Union.
It hasn't been a nice marriage, has it?
No, but, Britain's got some quite, the United Kingdom as a whole has got some pretty good benefits, if you like, overall. There are other negatives, and we can go into those. But over time, the benefits for the UK have been pretty considerable, especially access to the European Union market, which it will no longer have access to as a result of pulling out. It will be a year or two before all of that starts to bite.
Yeah.
But once Article 50 of the Treaty of Europe is invoked, which is the exit treaty.
If it is invoked, because they're saying there's a possibility they're in no hurry to invoke that.
Well, yes, the government of Britain may be in no hurry. It's got 6 months to 2 years, but I think within 6 months it will have to have ratified the vote. Yes, the government can ignore the referendum. It's advisory only. It's not, as far as people can work out at the moment, it's not legally binding on the government. So a government might decide that it's in the long-term best interest of the UK to ignore the referendum and to renegotiate with the European Council that, no, we are not leaving, and let's talk some terms for us to remain.
Can we just talk about that referendum and that whole idea that it is a recommendation? We spoke about that yesterday, and I think that this is only my personal belief, but any government would be crazy to go against a referendum, because that is the final bastion for a lot of us that we believe, look, take elections out of the scope. If we want something changed in a country, we're a democracy, and a lot of people go to that referendum ballot expecting that majority rule will win the day. And I could imagine there'd be so many hostile people if they said, look, we heard what you said, but we're not going to do it.
Yes, I think that's quite right, that a government would ignore it at its peril, and I think that's the dilemma that's now facing the British government. And they only have themselves to blame in many respects, and I'm saying that across the parliamentary spectrum, because if you recall, it was the British Labour Party that was keen on European Union 2 decades ago and has been relatively keen and is still sort of keen. David Cameron, however, or the Conservatives, were quite hostile to the European Union and have made a good deal of political mileage, shored up their support locally, like domestically as a result. And then, but come the actual crunch time, David Cameron, who'd made a lot of political mileage and anti-EU rhetoric and said some really nasty things and quite damaging things about the current European president and some of the practices. The outcome, though, was that David Cameron supported staying in the Union. So he changed his tune when it really came down to it, partly because I think he recognises that it was in Britain's long-term best interests, economically speaking.
Is it fair to say that England or the UK has never really embraced being in the EU? For example, they never took on the euro. They stayed with the pound.
Well, yes, and it's fair to say they never really embraced it in a sort of political, cultural sense. I mean, I think it was Winston Churchill who made the point about, if it came to a decision to be part of Europe or to sail the open seas, we're on the open seas. And that mentality, if you like, has been part of the British government's, successive British government's sort of mentality. On the one hand, wanting to be part of the benefits of the Union, on the other, using being part of the union as a bit of a whipping post to say, well, don't blame us as your government, blame the European Union because they're making us do this or whatever. And that whole argument about national sovereignty, which is in some respects exaggerated, and you can't have people agreeing on a course of action. That's to say, governments...
It's smoke and mirrors, really, isn't it?
Well, mostly, because if you have people joining together under a common banner, you actually have to agree on what that common banner is. That means that some of the things that you as an individual or as an individual country might have chosen to do, you might put on hold or decide that that's sacrificable in order to have a common outcome. It's a bit like playing a game of football or a game of baseball or whatever. You agree on the rules. And then if you want to play the game, you abide by the rules. If you don't like the rules and you either try to change the rules or you stop playing the game. Now the British have decided they're not going to play that game. It remains to be seen just exactly what the negative impacts are. Already they've lost their Prime Minister. He's resigned. The British Labor Party leader is under enormous pressure from his rank and file of a number of senior ministers. We might suggest that those who have resigned, 44 of them who have stepped out of his shadow cabinet, we might see that they're actually got some self-interest there in terms of where they want to go. And we've now seen that one of the financial agencies has downgraded Britain's credit rating by two ranks. There's a whole series of discussions and arguments we could have around all of that sort of thing, in terms of downgrading credit ratings and the way in which finance capital sort of dictates this. But, in a nutshell, it's probably the dominance of finance and the bankers that have led to immense dissatisfaction with the way in which the European Union has unfolded. And the Spanish, the Italians, the Greeks, they've all had the negative side of it. The British have had the better side of it. Whether they'll survive independently in the way that they think they will, that, I think, is still a very open question.
Okay, well, and that's not the only game they won't be playing, because they're not going to be playing any more football, going down 2-1 to Iceland.
Poor old Jeremy Corbyn, Todd, may well be blamed for Britain's loss to Iceland.
Oh, dear, it's not a great day to be a POM. Jim, thank you very much.
My pleasure, Todd.
Professor Jim Joes from the Newcastle University.